Like, my wife, hopefully she's listening to this. Let this be the reminder, babe, that like sitting in a chair for 14 hours a day is probably not the greatest thing for your hips and the way you feel in your posture. Episode 12, Pursuit of Balance. We're going to talk about mobility frameworks and how we can fix any of your mobility restrictions or issues and how to change the lifestyle around it. So, welcome to episode 12, Pursuit of Balance. So, this is something I talked about in a team meeting last week. And, something that I really try to get ingrained in the coach's head is like, I'm a principle guy and a framework guy. Like, for me, it's like, instead of thinking about the individualized situation of like, what do I do with this muscle group or what do I do with this joint? If we can build a foundation off frameworks and build principles that we follow, you just apply no matter what it is that I'm dealing with inside of that framework and inside that principle to fix that issue. And that's a lot of stuff that I try to do with the business. And that's obviously what I'm going to share with you guys in mobility. So if you're anybody that is dealing with mobility restrictions or tight muscles or pain, this is going to be the episode for you. So I broke it down to kind of three things, right? And then I'm going to kind of follow it up with kind of, a lifestyle piece and an exercise selection piece, right? So the three pieces that we follow is we go through a release section first, right? So we're going to go through some soft tissue work. That could be foam rolling, trigger point, massage therapy, whatever we're using tool-wise. Second thing is we're going to go through a lengthening section, which is going to be obviously what you would think about is I'm going to find positions, corrective exercises, stretches, or exercises that allow me to put you in a lengthened position or put that muscle in a lengthened position or put that joint in an end range position. And the third thing is we're basically now going to strengthen that, right? That muscle that we're possibly working on, or more importantly, the antagonist muscle behind it. So I'm going to give you guys I'm just going to use hip flexors today because a lot of us lack hip extension. When you think about hip flexor mobility, right, the ability to get my leg behind my body. So if I was thinking about walking, running, the ability to extend my hips on a squat or a deadlift, you need to have enough hip flexor range of motion in order for your hips to actually truly extend. So if you think about the pelvis, right, if you guys are watching this on YouTube, the hip flexors are going to be on the anterior side, the front side of the hips. If they're short or if they're tight, they're going to pull the hips down and forward because they're going to want to be in their shortened position. And what that's going to do on the back side is that's going to take the hamstring, that's going to lengthen them. So you're going to have a lot of tension on the front side, the anterior side of the hips, and you're going to have a lot of tension and shortening on the lower back. And you're going to have some lengthening on the abdominal wall, you're going to have some lengthening in the glutes and some lengthening in the hamstring. So in order for me to fix this issue, right, we need to go about a release, length, and strength kind of protocol. So that's the framework that I want you guys to follow with no matter which joint or muscle group we're talking about. And I'll give you guys more examples as we go on. So if we were to use the hip flexors here, if I wanted to go through a release section of this, right? So let's first talk about what is release actually doing and what does that mean? I use this example with flat, which is kind of like our onboarding certification for coaches, is like if you were to sell foam rollers door to door, what does a foam roller do, right? And I used to, for the longest time, say, it breaks up adhesions, it breaks up scar tissue, and it improves range of motion of a muscle, right? Now, the last part's true. It does improve range of motion, but not for the reason that most of us think. It does not necessarily break up adhesions or scar tissue. Like, there was a certification I did that was like, is anybody a doctor or surgeon here? And like one guy was saying, he's like, do you think you could break up scar tissue or adhesions with a foam roller? He's like, fuck no. He's like, it's even hard to do that with like real tools. So what it's doing is it's a neuromuscular facilitation, right? There's like these little mechanoreceptors in the muscle that are going to be sensitive to touch or pressure, right? So I forget what they're called. There's like Golgi tendon organs. I always call them GTOs, right? Which are basically going to be in a sense, the sensors towards a stretch or tension. But these mechanoreceptors, when you apply pressure to a muscle, either through rolling, either through trigger point, either through massage therapy, what's happening is the brain is obviously through these mechanoreceptors is going, whoa, there's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of tension here. So in order for us to kind of not deal with this pain or not deal with this level of sensitivity that I have, I'm going to tell the muscle to relax, right? So you're getting this neuromuscular facilitation, right? So the reason why foam rolling is so powerful is because it's going to create a window of opportunity for us to be able to maybe move with less pain, to provide some blood flow, to get some gliding surfaces back with fascia and muscle. When you think about muscle fibers, remember muscle fibers through contraction and relaxation, they slide against each other. Fascia is this connective tissue that holds the entire system and body together. So have you ever seen like that little white film on chicken breast when you're cooking? Like that's fascia, right? So it almost looks like skin. So this connective tissue It's going to be sensitive to two things. Fascia is going to be very sensitive to hydration. So if you're dehydrated, right, or if you're, I always like to use this as an example. Go out for a night and drink a lot, and tell me how your hangover feels the next day. It's like not only on your head, but how your muscles feel so stiff. And the reason why, dehydration at a fascial level. Second thing is movement, right? When your body's not experiencing movement, the nervous system is going, yo, we don't ever go here, so I'm not going to turn the lights on in this range of motion. And that is a relationship of exposure and fascial relationship. So when we're using foam rolling techniques or using trigger point techniques, so the hip flexors, you have your rectus femoris, which is one of your quads. It's the only quad muscle out of all four that actually extends the knee and flexes the hip. Then you have your iliopsoas, right, which is basically two muscles. It's your iliacus and your iliacus, and your psoas, right? So these muscles are obviously going to be shortening and contracting when we go into hip flexion, and they're going to be lengthening when we go into hip extension, like getting my leg behind my body. So when I start to roll my quads, my rectus femoris, or I start to release through trigger point, or if anybody's ever done a manual therapy release where like, they put you on your side, they take your hands around your hips and they just pull in and yank on your psoas, fucking gnarly. It is probably still one of the most sensitive releases I've ever done. What it's doing is, like I said, it's communicating to the nervous system via the mechanoreceptors that like we need to create a more relaxed state. So that facilitation is a neuromuscular thing that creates that window. So if I was someone that's dealing with pain, it's going to help modulate pain a little bit, right? Like I said, it's going to help with nitric oxide and blood flow. It's going to help with some of the gliding of the tissue. Now, when you think about foam rolling or trigger point, I always think, and this is going to be the same thing with the lengthening or stretching, is there's kind of two principles that I like to follow. There's passive releasing and there's active releasing. So I want you guys to imagine I'm just rolling up and down on my quad on a foam roller. So I'm laying down, I'm on my elbows, one knee out to the side, foam roller right over top my quad. If I'm just rolling up and down with the tool, it's considered passive. I'm not doing anything else to contract or lengthen a muscle. If I let the foam roller or the ball or whatever tool I'm using stay there in place, and then I extend my knee, flex my knee, extend my knee, flex my knee, that would be more what we call an active release. I personally think that you're going to get a lot more ROI out of active release and active stretching than you are passive stretching and passive release. And the reason why is now I'm getting the brain and the muscles to actually be involved with this release, right? Versus just like pressure and just letting the pressure do its thing. I want to also get there and then tell the muscle to contract and then tell the muscle to lengthen by engaging my hamstrings and glutes. Engage the quads, engage the hamstrings. So that kind of active release is going to, like I said, it's going to create that window of opportunity. Now, where foam rolling is a complete waste of your time is if you only get to step one and you go, oh, I feel good, I'm going to move on with my life. You are forever going to be reliant on your masseuse or your foam roller or your trigger point technique or soft tissue release for the rest of your life, right? And this is where people go wrong. This is what's wrong with chiropractic approach. The Western practice is like, let me adjust your spine. I'll see you 3 times a week. The problem with that is the reason why the skeletal system's off is because the muscles are off, and the reason why the muscles off is the nervous system's off. So like everything is just like integrated in itself. So the bone or the spine is not just off. You don't just adjust it manually and go, your spine's fixed. And it's the same thing with massage therapy. And that's something I know a lot of people don't want to hear because it's much easier to just lay down and get rubbed on and then just go, cool, fixed. Not the case. But it's going to create a window of opportunity. So the reason why we see an improvement in range of motion is not necessarily because the muscle is quote unquote got longer. It's because the nervous system has basically allowed the body to move a little bit more freely because obviously pain modulation, right? Or like I said, the nervous system kind of quote unquote releasing. So when I use the word release, I want you guys to just really be clear on that. Like we're going to do it when people ask me how many reps, sets, or time, you're going to roll or do whatever technique you're doing until you feel a release. And the easiest way to understand this is like if I'm rolling on my quad and it's 8 out of 10 on the sensitivity scale, I'm going to keep rolling until that 8 turns into a 5, right? Because, it's like, hey, pain's gone down, sensitivity's gone down. That's basically just kind of like a telltale sign that we are getting the release that we're looking for, okay? So the second thing that we're going to look at is we're going to look at the lengthening stage, right? So if I think about the hip flexors in this case, I need to do things that get me in an extended position of the hip or even ideally hyperextended position of the hips. Like when you think about running, your knee is actually going to get behind the hips. It's not going to get just under the hips, right? If you think about a deadlift or a squat, when you stand up and extend through that movement, you're just getting your knee under your hip. So you're extending, but you're not like you're not having the full extension of getting the leg behind you. So I would do things like think about like an easy stretch right now. It would be like a couch stretch, right? So like if I do a couch stretch where I have my one knee down on the floor, the other foot up, and I have that foot with the knee down up against a wall, rack, or a bench. So I'm getting the stretch of the quad, I'm squeezing my butt, dropping that rib cage down, I'm kind of stretching out my hip flexors, right? Or I'm going to do movements that put me in a more extended position. So I might do things like split squats. I might do things like reverse lunges. I might do any lunge. I might be doing ATG split squat, which is going to be kind of this down and forward action, which is as I come forward, I'm also getting more extension in my hip. So I want to basically expose myself to these ranges that are going to get me into a hip extension. Now, the one thing that we need to remember is if I don't have the range of motion yet, you're going to be restricted in the amount of range that you're going to be able to do with some of these lengthening drills. And that's okay, because just like any other stretch, it's just the one thing about mobility that I really want to be clear on and everyone to remember. Mobility by definition is the strength within a range that you have. Flexibility is passive, mobility is active. Flexibility is like if I hug my knee, I can get my knee to go pretty high up, right? If I lift my knee myself, I can't get it to go as high. Lifting my knee myself without hugging it is mobility. That's just basically the strength that my hip flexors have to pull my leg up. Now, the reason why I can go farther by hugging is because now I'm using additional force to get my leg up by pulling via my arms, right? So having flexibility, yes, is going to be kind of a prerequisite in the foundation because it's impossible to have more mobility than it is flexibility. And also, I don't ever think that it's even possible for 99% of us to have equal amounts of mobility and flexibility. That would be the goal. The goal is to close that gap. Like if you want to do a test, if you're listening to this, if you're not driving or when you get home or whatever, and you're in the gym, stand up and just lift up your knee with your own strength as high up as you can, right? And then from there, lift it, pull and hug that knee as high up as you can. The difference between that range is basically the difference of the strength and the kind of the nervous system kind of perspective, but it's the difference in strength that you have in your hip flexors to get there. So when you're going through these lengthening drills, we want to keep them active. And a good way to just understand active stretching versus passive stretching, if I do this couch stretch that I'm talking about, right? Like hopefully if I break down this video, I'll like drop a video on this stuff. But if I'm doing a couch stretch, if I just sit there and I don't really think about my breathing and I don't really think about engaging any muscle, it's more passive. But in order to really truly shut a muscle off, we want to engage the opposing muscle group, right? So for the hip flexor, the opposite muscle would be your glutes and hamstrings. So if I'm in a couch stretch and I squeeze my butt as hard as I can, I'm communicating to the brain that, hey, relax the hip flexor more for me so I can actually get more contraction and shortening from the glute. So when you're doing these drills, it's important to understand that like I don't want to just passively get into these ranges. I want to actively get into these ranges. So we want to think about, okay, what's the active protocol that I can apply? Same way that I look at foam rolling. It's like, okay, squeeze the butt, squeeze the hamstrings, tilt the pelvis back a little bit more. But then the most important thing that I can leave for the first step and the second step is your breathing. When your body is in this sympathetic place, right? So one of the beautiful things about foam rolling or massage therapy is that basically it's bringing down muscle tone. And what that means is if we're sympathetically driven or we're in this kind of fight or flight state, our body's holding tension, right? In a neurological state, but that obviously comes down to a tissue perspective. So we want to get the body to kind of be more parasympathetic. When it can relax, your body can access more range, right? Two things that can improve your range without doing any foam rolling or any stretching is improving stability and reducing pain or fear, right? If your body is in pain or fearful of a range or unstable, it's going to kind of lock up the range of motion as a protective, like a defensive mechanism towards moving, right? It's your body's like, yo, like we've been hurt here before, or the joint or muscle kind of hurts around this area. So what we're going to do is we're going to protect you by not allowing you to access that full range so we can kind of stay in a safer range. So when you improve stability, so this is why, like if I'm doing a split squat, maybe for a client that's brand new, I might have them do a split squat holding onto a squat rack or holding onto two PVC pipes, something that's going to give them more balance, right? When I do an active straight leg raise test on a movement screen, sometimes I'll have people hold my arm and pull down. And when I improve their stability, their mobility dramatically improves. So the thing that controls this kind of muscle tone and this parasympathetic state, the number one lever is going to be your breath. So when you're doing these stretches, when you're doing these isometric holds at end range, when you're doing foam rolling or massage therapy, you need to make sure that you are being coached or you're telling yourself to really slow down the breathing. Understand that inhale is sympathetic, right? It gives us energy. It's fight or flight. Exhale, parasympathetic. It's relaxing. So a good cue and a good rule of thumb is for every breath, second of breath you take in, exhale 2. So if I do a 3-second inhale, I exhale for 6 seconds. Longer exhales are going to be more parasympathetic by nature. And this is what most people screw up. This is what I don't like about sports massage and deep tissue. If it's too intense, is if I can't get my breath to relax, you're not going to get as much ROI. If I'm doing foam rolling or trigger point work and you're holding your breath and tensing up, you're defeating a lot of the purpose of it because we're trying to decrease muscle tone and improve the parasympathetic state that we're trying to get into. If you're trying to stretch, but you're holding your breath, you're not telling your body that this is a comfortable range. In order for your body, Kelly Starrett says this really well with his mobility programming, that in order for you to really own real estate of range of motion, you need to be able to contract a muscle group on both sides of the joint, and you need to be able to breathe in a relaxed state, right? So it's like if I get you into a hip extended position like a couch stretch, but then you can't, you're trying so hard to just force end range of motion, it's going to be a stretch that's really going to give you some quick little improvement in range. Tomorrow you'll be right back to square one. So we want to tell the body like, hey, I can not only contract the muscle, meaning like, oh, I can squeeze my butt and I can contract my hip flexor. So in FRC, they call this pails and rails, which is progressive angular isometric loading and regressive angular isometric loading, which is a fancy way to say like, if I were to flex my bicep here, imagine I had some resistance in my arm. If I try to extend my arm into my opposite hand and engage my tricep, I get some engagement there, and then now try to flex my bicep again. So I'm basically able to get contraction. So it's like, okay, this is a range that I contract. And also it looks good on YouTube, right? This is a range that I have ability to contract. Also, if I do that, can I contract and relax, right? So understand that those kind of principles for breathing and fixing range of motion long-term are the foundation to that, right? Because like the framework is release, length, and strength, and the principle is like, I need to understand that I need more active work and I need to focus on the breathing when I'm doing that active work. Now, do not get me wrong. I'm not saying that passive rolling or passive stretching is bad. Still need to do it. And if anything, if you are someone that's super stressed out that has trouble breathing and getting into good position, I'd probably start there because it's much easier to just relax and breathe than it is to contract and breathe, right? So like take it one step at a time of like, how am I progressing through this kind of like ladder of progression that I'm taking to improve someone's range of motion or mobility. Now, the third part and the final part, which is really kind of like the save button for your range of motion, is if I'm missing the ability to extend my hips, right? So because my hip flexors are short and I've done my release section and I've done my lengthening section, and now all of a sudden I have a 5 or 10 degree improvement on ability to extend the hip. The improvement that you made is also the gap that the opposite muscle doesn't have in strength, right? Meaning if I give you 10 more degrees of range of motion, that 10 degrees, the opposite muscle has probably not got a lot of contraction in because it's never had the ability to get there in the first place. And I hope that makes sense. So the way that we kind of use this example is like your glutes and hamstrings maybe have never really gotten into a place where they can tilt the pelvis back enough and fully extend the hips in a split squat or a running or a squat or a deadlift enough. So when I go do a release and strengthen, or release and lengthen, I want to go strengthen the antagonist muscle group, right? And I'm going to say there's going to be some context here, but I'll follow that up in a second. So after I do my foam rolling rectus femoris, I release my psoas, I do a couch stretch, I do some exercise that are going to be more hip extension based, like an HEG split squat or a split squat in general. Now what I want to do is I maybe want to follow it up with like a glute bridge, right? A single leg glute bridge on my back, right? Something that just gets me into extension, and then I isometrically hold it. You got to remember that your muscles and joints are generally the weakest at their end ranges, fully shortened and fully lengthened. So we want to be able to get contraction on both sides of it. So this is where the context item is going to pop up, because I'm also going to talk about how it's important to also strengthen your hip flexors, even though they're tight. But before I get there, I want to keep finishing up what I'm talking about. That like a glute bridge is like, I don't want to just do these little, like I was talking about this with hip thrusts yesterday. Hip thrusts have become a very popular exercise for the booty building community, right? It's an exercise that's great for glute development because you're extending the hip, but it's in a shortened position, right? Like an RDL is a lengthened position for the glutes and hamstrings. Hip thrusters working the same muscle groups, but it's working in more in a shortened position. Now, it's a fantastic movement to do that, but let's say you have an anterior tilt, like your pelvis is actually pulled forward and down, and you kind of have a little bit more extension, or what we call lordosis, in your lumbar spine. If you were to arch your back as much as you can right now, if you were standing up or even sitting, Try to squeeze your stomach and your butt as hard as you can in an arch position, right? Now, flexing around and try to do it again. You're going to get so much better contraction. Sometimes it's almost even impossible when you're arching your back to even feel those muscles when they're flexed. And the reason why is your core and your glutes flex the spine and posteriorly tilt the pelvis. And I see this all the time with hip flexors. Is a lot of times people will go into a hip flex or not hip flexor, sorry, hip thrust, and they'll do their hip thrust, and then they're doing it, and their back is all arched, and their belly sticking out. And not even saying because you have a belly, I'm saying because you're just arching your back, so you're creating like the projection of a belly. That is a really good way to train your hamstrings and your lower back through extension, not your glutes. So if you want to build a big ass through hip thrust, you need to make sure that you can actually get into the correct position. So when it comes to strengthening, I love isometrics, which is like, let's get to the end range of whatever that range of motion is for that muscle or that joint. And I want you to hold it, right? And all I'm going to do as a coach is I'm going to have you hold it. I'm going to have you focus on breathing there. And I'm going to just correct getting in the perfect position, because I can do a glute bridge on my back with my back extended, or I can kind of tuck that rib cage, tuck that pelvis. Every time I exhale, I squeeze my butt, my core a little bit harder. So really fixating what a perfect position looks like. What that's telling the brain now is, oh, the glute does have the contractibility at this range of motion. So if I do that enough times, I'm going to get stronger there, and I'm not going to deal with the tight hip flexor on the opposing side, because now my body uses that range of motion. And it is one of those things. Your posture is going to tell me a lot about your daily movement habits, your posture, your position that you spend time in, the stress, like the state of stress that your body's in, right? For example, if you're someone that's super sympathetic and stressed out all the time, your body actually will have a more extended spine. Your rib cage will stick out, your hips will dump forward. And the reason why that happens is stress is something that's more inhalation based, meaning my posture is actually more advantageous to be extended because I can take bigger inhales, right? If I want to obviously get out of that state and I want to fix my posture, my muscle groups, when I breathe out, you feel everything drops. Rib cage drops, pelvis tilts back. I'm able to get into these better positions. So the little context items that I brought up a couple times is like, I also want you to remember that just because a muscle's tight does not mean it's strong. This was something that I made a mistake of a very long time in my career of like, oh, my hip flexors are tight, so never do things that obviously strengthen the hip flexors, right? So like yesterday or last week, I'm sorry, I was doing one of these like prep exercises for squats, and I was doing like, I had ankle straps and I would hook up the cable machine to my ankle, hold the PVC pipe so to have my foot behind me, and I would just do like a knee drive. Almost look like I'm sprinting in place with one leg. And what that's doing is it's allowing to get my leg behind me, so I'm getting a little bit of stretch, but then I'm also shortening my hip flexor as well. Or I'll do things like L-sits, right? So like the parallel bars where you basically have your legs straight. It's the core exercise that we all think about. That's going to strengthen your hip flexors at their very end range too, which is going to get your core stronger as well. So don't think about, I just always work on the antagonist part of strength. I think it's very important to remember that there's always going to be two sides, and there's always going to be an opposing side to every joint and every muscle group that you do, right? So it's like, if I want to improve my ankle range of motion, yeah, I need to release and lengthen my gastroc and my soleus, aka my calves, but then I need to strengthen the tibialis, that muscle on the front side. So doing toe raises, doing the tib raises that we do, things like that. If I want to improve my overhead position, my ability to flex, yeah, I need to release my chest. I need to release my lats. I need to release maybe even my upper trap. But then I need to get stronger. I need to get my mid and lower trap to be stronger so they can actually kind of, you know, tell the brain that I own this position. So after I release pec, release trap, release lat, stretch pec, get into positions that allow me to access this, now I might do like a prone Y raise, or I might do things that strengthen that new range of motion. So those are like the frameworks and the principles that I want you guys to think about. Is you release a muscle, you lengthen a muscle, and then you strengthen the antagonist side. But for good measure, I would strengthen both sides, but I probably would spend more time on the antagonist side. So no matter the muscle group, just always think about that. Your step 1 and step 2 are on the same side. Step 3 is going to be on the opposite side, right? So like I said, if I have tight calves, I need to work on my tibialis. If I have tight hip flexors, I need to work on my glutes. If I have tight pecs, I need to work on the back of my like mid back, so rhomboids, mid trap, things like that. So whatever it is, those are kind of the frameworks that I want you to think about. Principle is think about, make it as active as possible so you get contraction, and make sure that you're really focusing on primarily using your breath as a strategy to tell your brain that I own this. I feel good here. This is all good for me to do, right? Now, the lifestyle pieces that I want to kind of leave you guys with, just to wrap this up, is remember that your position and your lifestyle is really going to dictate your posture. And I say this as a reminder because I think a lot of times, even as fault as coaches to our clients, but even clients, obviously, for someone that's listening to this, the biggest mistake that you can make is trying to do about 10 minutes of mobility after your workouts for, a couple times a week and then not changing your daily movement or not changing your lifestyle that's obviously put you in that position in the first place. The root cause is the thing we need to address, not the symptoms. So if the symptom is I have tight hip flexors because I'm stressed, or I have tight hip flexors because I sit down all day and my core and glutes are weak, then yes, the mobility stuff that I just gave you is going to help. But what I really would be doing is like, I would be prioritizing going on walks, things that actually extend my hips and move me a little bit more. I would prioritize getting out of the chair and maybe doing standing desks or maybe working half kneeling. So on one knee or both knees behind a desk for a little period of time, like break up my days. If I have someone that has rounded shoulders and like kind of like this, rounded upper back, like, what we call kyphosis, right? Or just stuck in flexion. Maybe I'd work on my laptop where I'm laying down on the floor on my elbows, right? So it's like when I work on the laptop, I used to do this as a kid where I'd watch TV, I'd be laying on the floor on my elbows, puts me in extension. Those are little things that like habit wise are going to put you in better positions, right? Like the best thing you can do for overhead position is just like exploring these ranges, right? So hanging or doing handstands, like those are things that like if you were to do those more often, your probably overhead range of motion would be better. Which kind of leads me into the next part, which is your exercise selection. And this is something that like we try to do here a lot of functional lifestyles is like, I don't want to just do movements to get you strong, get you faster, and get you good looking. I also want to do all those things that also in return can make you a better mover through improving posture and improving your range of motion. So for me, I love prioritizing when it comes to upper body day, a lot of overhead work, right? Let's do pressing, let's do pulling, but let's do them overhead because this is where a lot of us lose our range. A lot of us kind of just tend to stay here with upper body. I want to do things that put you in hip extension. I want to do things that force you to rotate so you don't get stuck in just flexion extension only. Like understand your body is three-dimensional. You rotate, you laterally move, and you go forward, backwards, up, and down. So the more that we can select exercises that are going to be more built around improving end range, the more that I can also improve my range of motion as well. So, and that's something that really it took a little development in my career, or a lot of development of like, okay, I would do the basic bodybuilding training and then I would try to sprinkle some mobility. Then over time, I was like, okay, well, maybe if I make the movements more full range of motion and do the mobility, I can get a little bit more ROI because I'm getting more exposure with these ranges that I'm trying to improve. Or if I can make my training be better at that and have the mobility and change someone's lifestyle around it, okay, now we're getting somewhere. Now we're actually getting some like dramatic and drastic change around someone's range of motion, posture, mobility. So those are kind of the things I want to leave you guys with is like the principles around breathing and tension and contractions, like how the nervous system and the muscles work, right? The reason why the bones are off is because the muscles are off. The reason why the muscles are off because the nervous system is off. The framework to follow is first release a muscle, right? Soft tissue, foam roll, trigger point, then lengthen it, do your stretches, dynamic stretches, warm up, corrective exercises built in, exercise selection that gets you into these ranges you're trying to improve. Then strengthen the antagonists, right? The opposing side, but do not sleep on strengthening also the tight muscle because there's ways that you can do lengthening and strengthening. If I were to take any progression that I've made over the last few years, is I try to pick a release and then I try to pick a lengthening and a strengthening. Actually, are kind of the same thing. Like, what are exercises that are also going to improve both, right? So it's like if I do a split squat, for example, it's like now I'm working on my glutes through hip extension, but I'm also maybe I'm going to do a deficit split squat so I also can get some lengthening in there by getting a little bit more of a stretch. So you could even try to figure out ways to combine those two when you think about that selection. Then exercise selection. Think about if you are someone that's doing your own programming listening to this, like pick exercises that are the deficits in your ranges, right? So if you're missing certain ranges, I would do movements that get you into more exposures of that range. Now, you might need to go through regressions in the beginning. So maybe instead of doing a barbell overhead press, maybe I'm doing a landmine press for the time, right? And I can just lean into it. So it's a less harmful way to approach certain ranges. And then over time, as you improve it through those frameworks, then you can start to get into those full range of motion movements. Body weight, I think, is obviously going to be the king of most of these things. So, being really good at hanging, being really good at doing a wall walk and getting upside down, it's going to be great for inverted stuff, right? Walking, underrated thing for all that. Holding squats, right? Like if you can't hold a body weight squat at the bottom comfortably for more than a minute, like probably something you should really get some exposure to. learning how to bend over, learning how to rotate. Like those are all things I think just have natural exposure. And then the final piece is just like figure out ways within your lifestyle, especially with all these people working remotely, to get you out of the chair. Like, my wife, hopefully she's listening to this. Let this be the reminder, babe, that like sitting in a chair for 14 hours a day is probably not the greatest thing for your hips and the way you feel in your posture. So it's like we want to go on walks. We want to just maybe get out of the chair, lay down on the floor, work on your laptop for 10 minutes, right? Put a pad on the floor and get on one knee behind your desk and kick the chair out for a second. Like those little micro dosing of things, I think like make a dramatic effect when you compound them over time. But a lot of people sleep on them because they don't think it does anything within like the short term, but that's the goldfish brain that we all live with nowadays. So hopefully that helps you guys to kind of fix it. And just remember that framework can be applied to any muscle. It could be applied to any joint. It's just something that's a framework for you guys to take on. Okay. All right. Take care, guys.